Hi everyone, my name's Kaz, and today I'm going to be talking about the best books of 2018. These aren't necessarily books that were published in 2018, but these are the books that I read throughout the year. And overall, I had a pretty good reading year. So I'm going to be talking about the top 10 books/series that I read throughout the year. And I decided not to include any of the books that I've reread in previous years because for the most part, these were favorites that I wanted to reread for one reason or another. So I've likely already mentioned them in at least one favorites video. So, 10 books/series that I've read in 2018. First of all, we have Aborson by Garth Nix. This is the third book in the Old Kingdom series, but it's the second book where we follow Lyriel and Sam. I'm not going to dive into the synopsis of this book just because spoilers for the rest of the series, but in this world, in the Old Kingdom, we have a few different types of magic. There's charter magic, there's free magic, and most notably, there is the magic wielded by the Aborson. Basically, the Aborson wields 7 bells. Each of them has a different ability in kind of controlling the dead. And honestly, this is probably my favourite book of this series so far. I really liked meeting and getting to know these two characters in Lyriel, but just seeing the tension rise, so much suspense, seeing these characters grapple with their abilities, discovering a lot about themselves and what their roles are in the greater scheme of things. It was such a gripping story. Like, I feel like out of the 3 that I've read so far, this is the most action-packed. All of the characters that we meet are so fascinating, so wonderful. We also have a magical cat called Mogget and a magical dog called the Disreputable Dog. And if you've read the Nevernight Chronicle, they feel so reminiscent of Mr. Kindly and Eclipse. The banter we get between the two is fantastic. We also have a lot of sass with Mogget in particular, and the Disreputable Dog is just so incredibly loyal and will do anything, and it's just fantastic. Love this series. Fire by Kristin Cashore is the second book in the Graceling trilogy. However, this is a prequel to Graceling and it is set in a different area of the universe. Except for one, we have a completely different cast of characters, but in all honesty, it's completely separate because in this part of the world, there aren't really people with graces, but there are monsters. There's animalistic monsters and you're able to recognize them by their really vibrant and brightly colored plumage or fur or scales. And then there's also human monsters as well. And again, you can recognize them, I think for the most part, probably just from their brightly colored hair. So the main character, Fire, she is a human monster. Essentially, monsters have the ability to control people's minds. Fire becomes really entangled with the politics. Like the kingdom wants her to use her powers to defeat the kingdom's enemies, but she's really struggling internally with her moral compass. Like, she doesn't feel like that's the right thing to do. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, but overall, the characters are fascinating. I loved all of the friendships that Fire develops and all of the previous ones that we get to see at the start of the book as well. The romance was A+, I loved it. The world is incredibly fascinating and I love the concept of these monsters. I just want to say most of all, I loved Fire as a main character. She is absolutely fantastic and I really loved that she tried her best to stick to what she believed was the right thing to do, but at the same time she would always kind of question things and really try to see things from different perspectives to try and be as objective as possible as well. This was honestly such a pleasant surprise. I read Graceling many years ago and I did really enjoy it, but it took me so long to pick this one up and I have been regretting it ever since. I wish I'd read this sooner. Next up is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. This book is inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. The main character, Star, witnesses one of her friends being shot and killed by a police officer. She was right there when everything happened and she knows that her friend was completely innocent, and she's kind of torn between not wanting to get involved because this is such a traumatic thing for her to have experienced, but at the same time she feels like she has to say something, she has to do something because what this police officer did was so wrong and she wants to find justice for her friend. Overall, the reading experience of this was probably like, it was an enjoyable one in terms of I really liked the writing, I really liked Star as a character, and I really liked seeing Star's community as a whole, of the people kind of coming together after this devastating thing has happened and rallying together to kind of support each other and find justice. I absolutely adored that, and this book doesn't really shy away from the hard-hitting truths. Like, it makes you uncomfortable, it is quite confronting at times, but it's also a really engrossing story as well. I was on the edge of my seat pretty much the entire time, just wanting to know how things would turn out. Next up, we have books 2 and 3 in the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. So that's A Gathering of Shadows and A Conjuring of Light. The first book is A Darker Shade of Magic, and in that we meet Kell, who has the ability to travel between alternate worlds, and he basically jumps between different Londons. We have Red London, which is where Kell originates, and this is a place that is really vibrant and alive with magic. There is Grey London, which is more in line with the London that we recognize, and there is no magic. White London, which is basically being slowly eaten away by magic. It's a very, very dangerous place to go to. There's a lot of power-hungry people. And then we have Black London, and that place was completely devoured by magic. So Kell was adopted into the royal family, and then we have his brother Rye, who is a sweet cinnamon roll. Then we also have Lila. She's a bit of a thief. She wants to be a pirate. She is a babe. I read A Darker Shade of Magic back when it came out, then I reread it either towards the beginning of 2018 or at the very end of 2017, and I did enjoy it, but it wasn't until book 2 that I completely fell in love with the characters and with the series as a whole. As a whole, I think this series is quite serious and there are some really, really dark moments, but book 2 had some lighter, more fun moments, which I really, really appreciated, and we got to see the characters trying new things and discovering more about who they are as well. And then book 3 was an absolutely epic, gripping, really, really intense conclusion to the series. It was a lot to deal with. You might need to kind of mentally prepare yourselves, but I think it was so, so worth it. By the time you get to book 3, the stakes are so incredibly high. You're on the edge of your seat again, wondering what's going to happen, how things are going to turn out, but I feel like in the end it was really, really worthwhile. Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the third and final book in the Illuminae files, which I'm sure you guys know is one of my favorite series of all time. The first book, Illuminae, we follow Katie, Grant, and Ezra Mason. Katie and Ezra have just broken up when their planet is invaded by a mega corporation, and things just get worse from there, if you can imagine it. Katie and Ezra manage to hop onto a ship and are fleeing for their lives. Sprinkle in an insane artificial intelligence and a really terrifying virus, and you have Illuminae. I don't want to say too much because this is the last book in the series, but I will say it is very intense. We do meet some new characters who I really liked, though I wish we got a little more time with them. I was so happy to see more of the characters that we met earlier on in the series, especially Aiden, Katie, and Ezra. And whilst this probably wasn't as twisty and turny as the other books, it was a really, really satisfying ending. These characters are put through a hell of a lot, and as readers who have come to really know and love a lot of these characters, it's a lot to deal with, but again, super worth it. If you're not familiar with this series, it's also kind of set up as a dossier of files. So we have a whole bunch of really interesting formats. There's like video transcripts, there's instant messages, emails, there's also depictions of like notice boards. Overall, would highly, highly recommend this series. Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. This is the second and final book in the Strange the Dreamer duology. I'm sure you guys are probably sick of me talking about this series. Again, this fast became one of my favorite series of all time. So the first book, Strange the Dreamer, follows Laszlo Strange, who is an orphan, he's a librarian, and he's fascinated by this mythical city called Weep. He's spent so much of his life wondering about Weep and trying to find clues in the library that he works at, just going through all of the archives to see if he can find anything about Weep. And that's all I'm going to say, because I feel like you need to go in with as much mystery as you can. It just opens up to a huge, huge world. And Muse of Nightmares expands that world even further, pretty much infinitely. I was not expecting so much of the things that we learnt in this book about the characters and about the world, and it was so fascinating. Like, I honestly applaud Laini Taylor for her brain, her creativity. I just don't get it, but I love it. The writing style for me is just absolute perfection. Like, it is very lyrical, very floral, very, very rich in the descriptions, and I loved it. I think it worked really well, though I can understand why some people might not enjoy it as a writing style. For me, it just hit all the right notes. In terms of the characters, I think that this series does a wonderful job of humanizing the characters that are villains. Like, they're not really villains. Everything that they're doing is what they believe is right for not necessarily just themselves, but for the people they love. And that's what makes it so easy to empathize with the characters that have done antagonistic things, because in their stories they're doing exactly what they think they need to do to protect those that they care for. And we get to learn so much more about some of these characters in Muse of Nightmares, and Thyone Nero, I love his story arc so much. If you haven't read this duology, please do, I beg you. Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. So this one is a West African inspired fantasy novel. The author has said that it's kind of loosely inspired by bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I can definitely see some of that, but it is expanded past the 4 elemental magics. For example, we have the magi of darkness and light, of air, health and disease, time, animals, water, fire, all that fun stuff. We follow 3 different characters in here. The first one is Zélie, who you can see pictured on the front. When she was younger, she witnessed her mother being executed for being a magi. The king of Orisha, in an attempt to eradicate magic completely, executed everyone who was a magi, essentially the people that are able to wield magic. But Zélie crosses paths with a rogue princess and the crown prince, and she's doing what she can to hopefully bring back magic. I just thoroughly enjoyed this book. I know a lot of people have found that it didn't quite live up to the hype, because this was certainly a hyped up book on BookTube, but in all honesty it hit the mark for me. I really loved the setting, I loved the magic, I loved the world building, and the history behind magic as well was so fascinating to learn about. The characters are really interesting as well, and each of the 3 main characters goes on vastly different journeys, and I really enjoyed the ride for the most part. The main drawback for me with this book is Anan, who is the crown prince, and I feel like his development flip-flopped a little bit, and I really did not like the romance. I will say that. Did not like the romance. That aside though, I really loved the friendship that developed between Zélie and Amari. That was so precious to see. I really appreciated that. And just seeing Zélie struggle and try to be strong for the longest time, it just was really wonderful. And like, the ending of this book definitely made it for me, and I'm so excited for the second book. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Everyone needs to read this. Please and thank you. That is all. Goodbye. Evelyn Hugo is a Hollywood movie icon, and a little later on in life she reaches out to a journalist with an offer to basically write her biography. And this is a very tempting offer, because Evelyn Hugo is such an interesting character. Not only from a reader's perspective, but within the context of the book. She's a really fascinating icon. One of the things, or rather, the 7 things that a lot of people are also really curious about are the stories behind each of the 7 husbands that Evelyn Hugo had. So this journalist, Monique, accepts Evelyn's offer and basically has Evelyn Hugo tell her her life story, all the things that she did as she grew up, how she became a movie star, the different loves of her life. It was just an experience, let me tell you. This is definitely the type of book that I expect to reread many times. So I'm also going to be reading the physical book at some point, hopefully in the next year or 2. This just sucked me in without me even realizing it. Like, I started out, was like, yeah, this is interesting. Who's this Evelyn Hugo person? And by the middle, I was pretty much convinced that Evelyn Hugo was actually a real life movie star. Evelyn is just such a queen. She is a bisexual goddess during a time where bisexuality wasn't really recognized. And what was so interesting about Evelyn Hugo is that she's not always the most likable character. She does things that I really disliked, that hurts other people, but it all came down to the fact that she would do whatever she could by any means necessary to achieve her goals. And to an extent, I really respected that. There were also times where I was like, girl, this hurts to read because I love you, but I don't like what you're doing to other people. She is flawed, but she's such a charming character. I loved learning about Evelyn Hugo. I also really liked learning more about Monique's story as well. Towards the start, I wasn't super intrigued by Monique's story, but towards the end, I was starting to really develop a connection to the journalist as well. But just, can you read it, please? Like, this is definitely a hyped up book, but it deserves it. It is worth it. Even if this isn't a book that you think you'd normally read, just do it anyway, because for me the payoff was so incredibly high. One of my new all-time favorite books. I'm a little bit behind with this one, but I finally got to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. We have Kaz Brekker, who is given this opportunity to pull off the ultimate heist, and in order to do so he gathers a crew. So there ends up being Kaz, Inej, Nina, Matthias, Wylan and Jesper. And can I just say, we follow all of these characters' different perspectives, and I loved every minute of it. Like, I'm not opposed to multiple perspectives, but I sometimes find that with that many it can be a little bit overwhelming and kind of hard to connect to all of them. But each of these characters is so distinct. They have really interesting dynamics with each of the other characters, and all of their histories just really fascinated me. This was such a fun book. Honestly, I loved it so much. Buddy reading this with a friend as well was also great because we would talk about all of our theories and just gush about all of the characters that we loved because it was grand. We are currently reading Crooked Kingdom quite slowly because I'm actually reading it to read, which is also what I did with Muse of Nightmares, which made it a wonderful reading experience. If you have the opportunity to read a book to your friends, I would recommend it. It takes a lot longer to read, but it's worth it, because it's like the ultimate buddy read experience. Anyway, we're currently reading Crooked Kingdom, also thoroughly enjoying that. I know I was super late with this, but I can finally say I am on the bandwagon. I just had to sprint for the longest time to catch up with all you guys. Last but certainly not least, we have My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emile Ferris. This one I read on the recommendation of Emily from Possibly Literate and also Jay Kristoff, the author, and this did not disappoint. This is a graphic novel and it is set up like a diary. So these are all of the things that Karen, the main character, has drawn and written in her own diary. And amidst all of the things she's exploring and her story that she's sharing with us, we also have like these really cool illustrations. She's like redrawing these covers from horror magazines from the 60s and things like that. So cool. Seriously, what? The main character Karen also depicts herself as a werewolf. She's a werewolf detective. There's a woman who lives in Karen's building who is found dead, and Karen decides to investigate what happened and why. Her investigation leads her to some really intense truths, and this is all from the perspective of Karen, who's like 10 to 12 years old. So whilst there is enough given to us as the reader to understand what's going on, Karen herself might not necessarily fully grasp everything that she's kind of experiencing and witnessing. That being said though, she is intelligent, she is smart, she does pick up on things even if she doesn't fully understand the whole situation. In addition to this mystery and Karen being a bit of a detective, we also see Karen's journey of self-discovery. She's questioning her sexuality, but she's also becoming more aware of her status as a minority in the fact that she's not white, as well as being of a lower socioeconomic status. So this book definitely explores a lot of different things, but it wasn't pushing a message on you in a really forceful way. It was Karen learning more about herself, more about the world around her, and slowly kind of understanding more of what all of this meant. So those were the 10 books / series that I read and enjoyed the most in 2018. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would also love to know about the best books that you read in 2018, so please leave those down in the comment section below. But that is all that I have for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you very soon in a new video, but until then, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye!